r/NoSleep. Posted by Reddit user YungSeti. My best friend heard strange voices coming from a blizzard. He's been missing ever since. There are those things in life that stick with you. Questions that keep you up late into the night, troubling you to your core. Unanswered mysteries that haunt you like a stubborn ghost, always in the back of your mind. An angry specter, unwilling to die. The disappearance of my best friend, Evan Hoskins, and the unexplainable circumstances of our final few calls has served as my ghost. It's something I've dwelled on for years, asking myself questions I knew I could never answer, trying to make sense of that final day, those final calls. Well, like everyone else right now, I find myself alone at home with nothing but free time. And with free time come the ghosts. I've had enough tormenting myself, trying to make sense of something that I believe most likely defies any conventional explanations. Evan and I spoke on the day he disappeared. I was actually the last person he ever spoke to, as far as anyone knows. That knowledge was always accompanied by a significant weight, made only worse by the things he said. Strange, confusing things I've yet to make sense of even now. Maybe you all will have better luck. Perhaps you can explain what happened to Evan. Hey, are you seeing this fucking snow, dude? Evan's voice called from my phone in place of a greeting. I chuckled at the very abrupt, very Evan greeting, wincing and lowering the volume on my phone. Appropriately, in preparation for a conversation with my lively friend. At the time, I didn't notice it, and maybe even now, I'm misremembering, creating details my mind assumes should have been. I guess I can't know for sure, but looking back, it felt as though his statement was infused with far more panic than surprise. You know, most people start conversations with the word hello, Ev. I answered, with a smirk that I was sure he could hear in my voice. I leaned forward, grabbing the remote from my coffee table to mute the television. The woman on the news had been talking about the very snowstorm Evan was calling me about, using words like record-breaking and unprecedented to describe it, urging people to stay in their homes. I'd heard enough, deciding I'd had my fill of bad news for the day, and rose from the couch, making my way towards the window. Yeah, hi, whatever. Fuck, dude, are you seeing this though? Evan responded, mild annoyance bleeding into the urgency in his voice. I laughed, pulling the curtains aside as I made my way to the window. I peered out into the parking lot of my apartment complex, and I immediately understood why Evan had called. Yeah, that's a lot, I muttered, peering outside. The world outside was unrecognizable, plunged under a maelstrom of snow and ice, completely transforming the landscape. The road outside of my apartment were almost wholly obstructed from my view, hidden under a blanket of falling snow and ice. But from what I could see, it was empty. It made sense, especially given the hazardous weather conditions, and I was glad to see that people were staying safe and off the roads. But there was an eeriness to it that I was happy to have Evan distract me from. How long do these kind of things last for, man? Blizzards? It depends, I guess, I said, poring over mental images of past blizzard experiences, trying to come up with some estimate. A couple of hours usually? Evan sighed, muttering nervous expletives to himself for a while, before taking a deep breath. A part of me wanted to tease my friend. He was a California kid who had moved here for college, and he hated the cold as it was. It seemed to me that Colorado winters might have been more than he bargained for. I instead allowed what little maturity I had to take effect, and elected to be somewhat of a decent friend to try and calm him. You good, man? Yeah, I'm fine, he said, though his voice sounded far from it. I tried to sympathize with his position. He'd just seen snow for the first time earlier this year, and without warning, I could see how a snowstorm, especially to this extent, could be frightening. And though a smaller, shittier side of me still wanted to tease him for how much he seemed to be freaking out, I mostly felt bad for him. Leaving home for college had been tough for Evan, the loneliness contributing to much anxiety in the first few months here, and I could only imagine it was made worse, isolated at home in the storm. It's gonna be alright, dude. Trust me. I started, admittedly unsure of what to say. Yeah, I know, Mom, he responded, with his usual sarcasm, pausing for a moment. Fuck, dude. It's just, I've never seen anything like it. I furrowed my brow, an involuntary frown creeping onto my face. So nervous. He was notorious among our group of friends for his boldness. Evan didn't care. He'd do what he wanted, and let the consequences follow as they might. Sometimes he seemed brave, and other times, just stupid. But this was totally out of character for him. Look, listen, I started, combing my mind for some reassuring comment. Some words to quell the sudden and unexplainable feeling of discomfort Evan's call had stirred in me. I couldn't understand his panic, though I had to admit I was slightly contagious. It's no different than any other storm. Literally, just stay inside and you've got no real problem, I said, making an effort not to sound as though I was talking down to him. There was a long pause, and for a moment, I questioned whether the call had been dropped. As if in response, Evan broke the silence with a long, deliberate sigh. Thanks, Andrew, he muttered. For real. His statement rang with a surprising sincerity, as if my poor attempt to calm him truly meant a lot to him. I appreciated it, but it only served to exacerbate the weirdness of the entire situation, which I so desperately wanted to quell. No problem, Ev, I began. How about we fire up the PlayStations and just fuck around till it's over? Yeah, okay. I stayed on the phone with him as we turned our attention away from the weather and towards video games. Alright, so what are we playing? I asked, grabbing the remote from my game console and sinking back into the couch. Evan didn't reply. I waited for a few moments, expectations slowly morphing into confusion. Evan? Sorry, man, I just... Evan started, his voice quickly tapering off. Evan, are you alright? You're starting to worry me a bit. Like, actually worry. There was a pause followed by shuffling sounds of movement from Evan's end of the line, before his distracted reply. Yeah, I'm fine, just... Again, he trailed off. I had sat up in my seat, suddenly quite unable to relax as I waited for Evan to finish his sentence, or to say anything. I just thought I heard something outside. Evan spoke slowly, increasing suspicion audible in every word. Heard what? Where? I questioned. Evan's area was a sparsely populated, nondescript little area just outside the town. It was hard to imagine anyone outside in this weather. The side of the house. Maybe a coyote or something? Do we have those here? He said. That, and much more. If there's one thing we have, it's extensive wildlife. And you live right along the forest. He paused, considering my statement for a moment, before quickly suggesting we continue with our game. It was clear that Evan was still worried. Still scared. Scared of the blizzard, or the noises he said he heard. I wasn't sure, but he wasn't okay. That much was clear to me. Still, I knew Evan. There was nothing I could say to him that would serve as a better distraction than some good old simulated violence. So I agreed and we ended the call. I returned to my couch, putting on the game headset my friends had peer pressured me into buying, awaiting an invitation to Evan's game chat. I sat back, my mind drifting involuntarily back to Evan's call. On the surface, there was nothing outwardly too strange about it. Still, I found myself staring outside, my mind lost in that blizzard. In the vast nothingness, I shivered, attempting to swallow down the constricting feeling of claustrophobia. A sudden voice in my ear made my heart drop into a pit of my chest, panic shooting through me. "Hey," Evan called from over the headset. Relief rushed through me, outpaced only by silent embarrassment at my fearfulness. "Hey, what are we playing?" I asked, trying to stifle the slight shake in my voice as my heart rate returned to normal. We spent a few minutes finding a game, and almost an hour after that racing around virtual worlds in an effort to ignore our own. The game served the purpose of distraction, for me at least, perhaps a little too well. I was focused on the racing simulator we were playing, and my anxiety from Evan's call had almost entirely faded from the forefront of my thoughts. Had I been paying more attention, I would have sooner noticed how quiet Evan had gotten. I frowned, realizing it had been a while since we'd last spoken in the game chat. As if he heard my thoughts, Evan spoke, his words both confusing and scaring me. "I think there's something outside, dude." Something. The words seemed to hang for a brief moment as I searched dumbly for a response. To be completely honest, I've always been close to useless and stressful situations, and the one at hand was one I was not prepared for. It didn't matter. Evan spoke again before the silence could settle. "I've been trying to ignore this shit, man, but for the entire time we've been playing, I've heard sounds in the forest. At first they kinda blended with the wind, and it was easy to ignore," he began, speaking with a panicked quickness. "But that's not the wind, and it sure as fuck no coyote," Evan said with grave seriousness. I lowered the controller, no longer a pressing concern for either of us, and crossed the living room, resting against the wall nearest the window. The elements had conspired to put a show on, it seemed. The snow falling in seemingly endless amounts, made only worse by the powerful winds that had turned into a violent flurry. I was beginning to understand how someone could find the experience disquieting, perhaps even terrifying. "What are you hearing, Evan?" I was met with footsteps from Evan's end, followed by the sounds of an opening window. When Evan spoke, it was to breathe out a single word. "Listen." I waited, hearing only the roar of wind in my headphones. I pictured Evan leaning forward with his headset sticking out of the window, and almost laughed with the absurdity of the image. As I opened my mouth to comment, to make some tension-diffusing joke, I began to hear something. The sounds were faint at first, rendered nearly inaudible as the blizzard raged on, and I strained myself to make out exactly what I was hearing. I squinted, the sounds coming slowly into focus over the noise of the snowstorm. Slowly, I began to understand what I was hearing. Voices, several of them by the sounds of it. All were growing less and less faint, all moving closer and closer. Are there people out there?" I asked, my question one of genuine shock and confusion. I couldn't understand why or how anyone could be out there right now, and especially in Evan's neighborhood, which was much more densely forested than my own. "It sounds like it," he muttered, keeping his voice low as we listened. As awful as it may sound, I wanted to hang up. The feeling of dread was beginning to dawn on me in those moments, like nothing I've ever felt before. as something in me just began to scream out a warning. This is wrong. I swallowed, gritting my teeth as voices drew nearer. Do you see anyone? I asked him, not sure what answer I wanted to receive. No, he muttered. Fucking blizzard, I can barely see shit. Jesus, man, this is freaking me out. I sympathized with Evan's words, feeling much the same myself, although I knew I shouldn't relay that information to him. The strange instinct still gnawed at me, some part of me wanting very much for Evan to leave, to get away from his home, away from whatever strange folk may be traversing the woods at this time. I racked my brain, unsure of what to say. Evan spoke before I could. His words, hurried and panicked, only served to worsen the emerging sense of dread I was feeling. I can hear them, man. I can hear them talking out there. They're coming closer. I don't know, man. Call someone, I started, utterly unsure of what to say. None of it made sense. Who would be out there, in the forest during a storm like this? I stared out into the snowy beyond, and shivered at the thought of people just beyond the glass, staring back. Evan gave a sarcastic laugh. Oh, haha, call who? The cops? And say what? He asked, with anger rising in his voice. 911, I think I hear people walking through the woods. That's not exactly a crime, man. Plus, nobody's on my property as far as I can tell. I recoiled at the anger in his voice, though I understood the fear was responsible for it. I guess you're right, man. I just don't know what to say, I sighed, lamenting my inability to help my best friend. I heard him sigh, likely regretting the outburst. I'm sorry, man. His voice broke, and he took a breath, taking some more time to compose himself before finishing. Very, very freaked. I get it. To be completely honest, me too. This all feels very weird to me, I replied honestly. I wanted to help Evan in some way, to find some yet unseen solution that would dispel the strangeness of the night. But all I could do in the current situation was sympathize and try not to let him feel alone. I'm just gonna close the window and, I don't know, I'll leave the lights on so the house looks more occupied, Evan said, though I could tell the idea did very little to comfort him. Makes sense, man. You still want to play some more after? Nah, he murmured, voice dispirited, not really in the mood. Yeah, I understand. I'll call you. Cool. And with that, Evan ended the game chat. I sighed, lowering my head into my palms, my mind littered with concern. I was worried about more than just the strange people heard wandering Evan's forest, but Evan himself. The situation seemed to be wearing on his mental condition significantly, something that I knew wasn't good for him. I found myself thinking, while awaiting his call, memories like dry tinder stoking the fires of worry in my mind. I thought of a game we'd played a few months prior, after one too many joints, swapping of stories to see who had the most traumatic experiences. It was a silly, morbid idea, but that was kind of the stupid things we did. I'd given him a spirited and emotional telling of discovering my girlfriend had cheated on me in high school, which I finished with some extra dramatic flair. Evan had chuckled at my story, muttering a nice in appreciation of my delivery before responding with tales of his struggles. I don't feel it's my place to say too much about exactly what he went through. The very least I can give him is that basic human privacy. Still, in a broad sense, Evan had struggled with depression, anxiety, and a myriad of related afflictions from a young age, and it hadn't been easy. By the story of his third hospitalization, I was silent, staring dumbly as I searched for some answer, some words I could say to express my sympathy. I remember the silence lasting a moment, as Evan took another long puff of his joint, exhaled, smoke obscuring his face for a moment. He chuckled, which quickly became a cough. He spoke a few seconds later, a sly grin on his face as he muttered, "Guess I win." I laughed softly under my breath. An expanding sense of melancholy began to consume what little I found funny about the conversation. My best friend had been through enough in his life. With so much over his relatively short life, I prayed to whatever was listening that night he would not be afflicted anymore. I sat on the edge of the couch, glancing at my phone. 8:32, the time read. Evan still hadn't called.